Orgrim Doomhammer. To the humans of Azeroth, he was a monster, a conqueror, a destroyer, the Warchief who led the Horde during its darkest age. But to the orcs, his story was far more complicated. Because long before Thrall rebuilt the Horde, before Orgrimmar ever rose from the deserts of Durotan, there was another leader who tried to save his people from corruption. A warrior who realized the Horde had been poisoned from within. Not by humans, not by war, but by lies, betrayal, and demonic blood. This is the story of Orgrim Doomhammer, the tragic warchief of the old Horde. Long before the Horde invaded Azeroth, before the fell corruption, before Gul'dan twisted the orc clans into weapons of war, Orgrim was simply a young orc of the Blackrock clan. During the Kosh'harg festival in Nagrand, he met another young orc who would change his life forever. Durotan, the future chieftain of the Frostwolf clan. The two quickly became inseparable. Together, they challenged each other in combat, ignored traditions, and explored places they were never supposed to see. Unlike many orcs of their generation, Orgrim and Durotan were curious. They wanted to understand the world beyond clan rivalries. One day, after being attacked by an ogre, the two boys were rescued by the Draenor. Not only did the Draenor spare them, they welcomed them into their city. For the first time in their lives, the young orcs saw the civilization of the Draenor with their own eyes. Their wisdom, their technology, their kindness, and deep down, Orgrim realized something important. The Draenor were not monsters. But years later, the Horde would slaughter them anyway. As Orgrim grew older, he became one of the greatest warriors of the Blackrock clan. After the death of his father, he inherited the legendary Doomhammer, a weapon tied to an ancient prophecy, one that warned the last wielder of the Doomhammer would bring doom upon his own people. At the time, Orgrim ignored the warning, but the world around him was already beginning to change. Under the influence of Gul'dan and the Shadow Council, the orc clans slowly descended into bloodlust. The spirits of Draenor grew silent, the rivers began to die, the forests withered, and yet most orcs ignored the signs. Then came the moment that changed everything. Gul'dan gathered the clan leaders before a massive pool of demonic blood, the blood of Manaroth. One by one, the chieftains drank from it, binding themselves to the Burning Legion. But Orgrim refused. Not openly. He was too smart for that. Instead, he claimed he was unworthy to drink before Blackhand, a lie that saved him from suspicion. Deep down, Orgrim already feared that the Horde was walking toward destruction. As the First War began, Durotan uncovered the truth. Gul'dan had manipulated the Horde from the very beginning. The fell corruption, the war against the Draenor, the destruction of Draenor. It had all been part of a larger deception. Durotan secretly met with Orgrim in Loch Modan. There, he revealed everything he had learned, and Orgrim believed him, because by then, he had already seen the corruption spreading into Azeroth itself. The same sickness that had destroyed Draenor was beginning to infect this new world. The two old friends agreed on one thing. Blackhand and Gul'dan had to be stopped. But before Orgrim could act, tragedy struck. Durotan and Draka were assassinated, killed by agents loyal to the Shadow Council. Orgrim blamed himself. He had sent guards with them, men he believed he could trust. It was a mistake that haunted him for the rest of his life. By the end of the First War, the Horde stood victorious over Stormwind. But behind the scenes, the Horde was collapsing from within. Gul'dan had fallen into a coma. The Shadow Council was weakened, and Orgrim realized this was his only chance. He challenged Blackhand to Mak'gora, a duel to the death. Before the gathered Horde, Orgrim accused Blackhand of betraying their people and serving dark powers. The duel lasted for hours, two giants of the Horde clashing in brutal combat. Until finally, Orgrim crushed Blackhand's skull with the Doomhammer. And in that moment, Orgrim Doomhammer became Warchief of the Horde. But unlike Blackhand, Orgrim did not celebrate, because he understood something terrifying. The Horde had already become something monstrous. As Warchief, Orgrim immediately turned against Gul'dan's Shadow Council. To him, they were the true enemy of the orc people. Manipulators hiding behind fell magic and lies. Orgrim hunted them relentlessly. Warlocks were executed. The Shadow Council was shattered. Blackrock Spire became the new center of Horde power. But Orgrim faced an impossible problem. The Horde still needed strength to survive. The human kingdoms of the north were gathering. Lordaeron was preparing for war. And despite his hatred for Gul'dan, Orgrim allowed him to live, a decision that would later cost him dearly. The Second War transformed Azeroth into chaos. The Horde marched across Khaz-Modan. Stormwind had already fallen. Now Lordaeron stood in Doomhammer's path. Orgrim forged alliances with trolls and goblins. The Dragonmaw clan enslaved dragons. Massive fleets crossed the sea. And for a moment, it seemed as though the Horde might actually conquer the world. But the deeper the war continued, the more Orgrim realized the Horde could never truly win this way. The old traditions were fading. Honor was dying. And Gul'dan was still plotting in the shadows. During the Horde's greatest offensive against Lordaeron, Gul'dan betrayed them. Without warning, the warlock abandoned the Horde and sailed south in search of the tomb of Sargeras. Thousands followed him. The betrayal crippled the Horde's armies at the worst possible moment. Orgrim had always suspected Gul'dan would betray him. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. The Horde lost its momentum. The alliance rallied. And soon, the tide of war turned completely. At Blackrock Mountain, Orgrim Doomhammer faced Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth, one of humanity's greatest warriors. The battle became legendary. Steel against steel, human against orc. And in the end, Orgrim killed Lothar. But victory lasted only seconds. Instead of breaking the alliance, Lothar's death united them. Led by Turalyon, the alliance counterattacked with overwhelming fury. The Horde collapsed. Orgrim was defeated, captured, and imprisoned. Inside the internment camps, Orgrim witnessed the true cost of the Horde's corruption. The orcs were no longer warriors. Without fell blood and endless war, they became empty, hopeless, broken. For the first time in his life, Orgrim nearly lost hope himself. But fate had one final purpose for him. Because somewhere in the mountains of Alterac, the son of Durotan still lived. Thrall had been raised as a slave. But unlike most orcs, he still believed the Horde could become something better. When Orgrim first met him, he hid his identity. He tested the young orc, provoked him, insulted him, challenged his beliefs. And Thrall stood his ground. That was exactly what Orgrim wanted to see. Strength, honor, courage, the qualities the Horde had lost. For the first time in many years, Orgrim believed his people still had a future. Together with Thrall and Gromash Hellscream, Orgrim began liberating the internment camps. One by one, the orcs rose again. But during one final battle, disaster struck. Alliance knights ambushed the Horde. And amid the chaos, Orgrim Doomhammer was mortally wounded. A lance pierced through his armor from behind. As he lay dying, Orgrim made his final decision. He passed the Doomhammer to Thrall, along with the title of Warchief. And with his final breath, the old Horde died with him. Orgrim Doomhammer was not a perfect leader. He led invasions, wars, countless deaths. But unlike Gul'dan, unlike Blackhand, Orgrim understood the truth. The Horde had lost its soul, and in the final years of his life, he tried to restore it. Thrall would continue that mission. He founded Orgrimmar in Orgrim's honor, a city named after the Warchief who tried to save his people from themselves. Even today, the name Doomhammer still echoes throughout Azeroth, not as the name of a conqueror, but as the name of a warrior who realized the cost of corruption, far too late. And honestly, that is what makes Orgrim Doomhammer one of the most tragic characters in Warcraft history. Because in the end, he was fighting two wars at once. One against humanity, and one against the darkness inside the Horde itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Warcraft lore, feel free to subscribe,
and let me know which Warcraft character you want to see next.